Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Widespread reports in the Australian media say that 13 fellows have resigned from the prestigious Australia-India Institute, and in their letter of resignation to the Vice-Chancellor of Melbourne University, they've alleged political intervention and interference by the Indian High Commissioner in Australia, which has impinged upon their academic freedom. Joining me to discuss this disturbing and distressing situation is the founding director and CEO of the Australia-India Institute, now Professor of Disarmament Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Amitabh Mattoo. Professor Mattoo, as I said in that introduction, widespread Australian media reports have said that 13 fellows have resigned from the prestigious Australia-India Institute in Melbourne, and in their letter of resignation to the Vice-Chancellor of Melbourne University, they've clearly and explicitly said that the Indian High Commissioner in Australia is politically intervening and interfering and impinging on their freedom. As the founding director of this prestigious institute, how do you view what's happened?
When I read the reports, as you did, Mr. Thapar, I was equally disturbed. I was the founding director and stayed there for 4 years and then set up the institute here as well. So a story like this causes alarm. I did a little bit of investigation. So there are really 3 parts. One is who are these fellows who resigned, and the second is the charge or the allegation that the High Commissioner was interfering, and third then about the leadership of the institute, which would allow these things to happen. On the first, I found out that most of these fellows' term had expired, and now in terms of just the facts of the case, their tenure had expired, and so they were not really in a position to resign, because once the term ends, then they're disconnected automatically from the institute. The substantive part of their allegations is the one which is worrying, which is that the High Commission interfered. Now this is, I find, really baffling. Through my tenure, I had High Commissioners ranging from Sujata Mehta to Navdeep Suri, to then Biren Nanda, different personalities. Sujata Singh was someone who had strong opinions. Navdeep Suri was someone who was a really fantastic, outward-looking extrovert, a practitioner of public diplomacy. Biren Nanda, again, was someone who could be extremely charming and yet also low profile. But none of them, ever told me, talked to me, or suggested that this is what you should be doing. Because the High Commission, in any case, has very little say in the functioning of the institute. It's funded primarily by the federal government and the University of Melbourne and the state government of Victoria.
Can I come in at this point? You're clearly saying that the High Commissioners who were there when you were the founding director were very different. It's arguably quite possible that the High Commissioners since then have been very different also and have begun to intervene. But one more point about the fact that these 13 people have actually had their tenure ended and therefore they're not in a position to resign. I want to quote one of them, Ian Woolford. This is what he tweeted. "I have resigned my affiliation with the Australia-India Institute due to concerns over government interference and restrictions over academic freedom." Now, Ian Woolford is clearly saying he's resigned. He's not saying his tenure is over and his affiliation has ended for that reason. Yeah. And he's secondly explicitly saying that there's government interference and restrictions over academic freedom.
One, I have a great amount of respect for Ian Woolford. He's a lecturer at not Melbourne University, at La Trobe University, and he was affiliated, and I invited him to become a fellow of the institute. He's someone who's an expert on Bhojpuri folk music and has done a huge amount of anthropological work. He also teaches Hindi. So I'm not sure whether he's referring to interference in La Trobe or Melbourne University. I'd have to find out from in this specific case. But let me say, as of now, I was in Melbourne about 2 months ago. I met the High Commissioner, Manpreet Vora, who was earlier Deputy High Commissioner in Islamabad, and I had known him in that capacity. He was also ambassador to Mexico. Now, I'm not holding a brief for the MEA or Manpreet Vora. I would find it really, really beyond
But would the High Commissioner admit to you that we're interfering? Surely not. If anything, if you ask them the question, they would deliberately mislead and deny. No High Commissioner would say, yes, we're interfering.
Yeah, I'm on the governing board of the institute. Who would they interview through? Is it the Vice-Chancellor? Is it the Chancellor? Or the Chancellor happens to be the chairman of the Australia-India Institute?
Let me then quote from the letter that these 13 fellows wrote to the Vice-Chancellor of Melbourne University, Duncan Maskell. The letter has appeared in excerpts in the Australian paper, The Age. The Indian High Commissioner's interference led to some events relating to India being discouraged or not supported on the grounds that they were likely to be controversial. Now, you and I know that Indian High Commissioners and ambassadors frequently dislike events or subjects being discussed which are critical either of the government or the country. We're not tolerant of that, and we do find ways, sometimes subtle, sometimes not, of stopping them. Therefore, when I read that this has been happening in Australia, I'm certainly not surprised. I'm not surprised Indian High Commissioners do this. They shouldn't, but you and I know they do.
Karan, I think we need to go to the genesis of this institute. This institute was created at a particular moment in bilateral relations. You'll remember there were attacks on Indian students in Melbourne, and at that time the Minister for Education, Julia Gillard, who became Prime Minister, but the Prime Minister at that time was Kevin Rudd, decided to give Melbourne University $8 million to set up an institute. Now, Melbourne University had a past legacy of Indian studies, but not a contemporary legacy. There weren't really many India scholars there. When I became the founding director, I actually recruited fellows, recruited is the wrong word, invited fellows from within the scholarship available across Australia. It was an ad hoc decision taken by the director to invite them to become a part of the fellowship of the institute. But the institute itself was, the charter said, it's a department of the University of Melbourne, but the charter said that you need to deepen an understanding of India in Australia and Australia in India.
Quite right, but this is not but it wasn't intended as a public relations exercise. It was intended as an attempt to deepen academic understanding and knowledge and research. Yes. Unfortunately, I imagine that Indian High Commissioners object to some of the research because it reveals insights into what is happening in India which are not favorable to the image the government wants to project. That's the problem.
If that has happened, it's extremely short-sighted, because the one most counterproductive thing I thought we had learned is that do not interfere with universities, especially universities like the University of Melbourne, who have a great sense of self-esteem and who have a great reputation. They will not bend. But what I as director did was actually invite the whole spectrum of public opinion from India.
And rightly so.
From Nirmala Sitharaman to Nandi Sundar.
Let me give you examples again from the Australian media that suggest that there is some form of pressure and intervention, particularly when the fellows of the institute are discussing subjects that are going to be embarrassing or prove awkward because they contradict the image India wants to project. Firstly, I'll quote an instance from the Australian paper, The Age. Apparently, a widely advertised event was downgraded from a public event which was open to everyone into a private invitation-only seminar at the intervention of the Indian High Commissioner specifically. This happened in 2019. The subject was Keywords for India Violence, and the intention was to discuss the violence perpetrated on Muslims by Hindu nationalist groups. Now, that is clearly the sort of thing that would make the Modi government bristle, and if this sort of discussion is not permitted because it's going to embarrass the government, then this is clearly political interference.
This is one instance where I actually know the facts of the case. This is an anthropologist, I think a Scandinavian anthropologist in Stanford, who incidentally holds the Dhirubhai Ambani chair there in Stanford, who was invited to speak at Melbourne University in 2020, much before the tenure of the present.
Not 2019 as the Age
2019, 2020, I could be wrong, but certainly much before Manpreet Vohra or the present director of the institute.
But did intervention happen?
The facts of the case are that the academics is an expert on Shiv Sena, Hindu nationalism, and the invite, because first of all there were concerns about security and there were concerns about the large number of people who might turn up. The event was by invitation only, but was I mean, it went on.
But the paper explicitly says, and I'm quoting the Australian paper, The Age, that it was a publicly advertised event open to everyone, downgraded to an invitation-only private seminar.
But downgraded is really a subjective judgment. You actually
No, but forget the downgrading. Forget the downgrading. Was the nature of the event changed from open to everyone to a restricted invitation-only seminar?
Yes, it was changed to an invitation only, primarily because there were security concerns. And
Were there really security concerns, or was this a way of covering up for the fact that the Indian High Commission did not want a discussion that would embarrass the Modi government held publicly?
Look, I cannot speak for the previous director, but the present director of the institute, the CEO of the institute, Senator Lisa Singh, she's a friend of mine. And she's a great champion of bilateral relations.
And she wouldn't have done this?
I asked her explicitly, have you ever faced interference, pressure from the Indian High Commission on subjects you should cover, on talks or people who you should invite? She said, never, ever.
But was she the director when this
She
happened?
wasn't.
So then it's quite possible her predecessor did buckle under pressure.
Her predecessor was a dyed-in-the-wool academic. He was Craig Jeffrey,
This is the Australian paper, The Age,
yes.
and they in turn are quoting the letter the 13 resigned fellows have sent to Duncan Maskell, the Vice-Chancellor. No one in Australia has denied the content of the letter or the content of the article.
I'm surprised. I would have imagined that there should be a rebuttal since there are facts.
Absolutely. It would be in the Institute's good interest
Absolutely.
to rebut facts that are wrong. But equally, if those facts aren't rebutted, and remember this article came out on the 6th of April, so we're talking about something that happened 5-6 days ago, not rebutting it means it's the truth because you can't rebut it.
I thought Melbourne University had come out with a statement. Perhaps you should, it's not reached your computer yet, but there is a statement from the University of Melbourne which actually denies some of these charges. But
not this one. Not this charge. This charge is not denied by anyone, and therefore not denying an explicit charge is like accepting it.
Look, Karan, what I will admit, however, is that forget the High Commission, because there's either the Counsel General or the High Commission. I would think it's short-sighted, counterproductive for any High Commission to try and interfere, especially in academic institutions and universities. However, when you're running a think tank within an academic body, you are a kind of unique institution. That's why the Australia-India Institute is different.
Absolutely.
Because you are out there to champion bilateral relations, so you follow in some ways.
But champion bilateral relations not as a PR exercise, but by furthering research, understanding and academic
and policy work.
But remember, quite often, the furthering of research and academic understanding leads to outcomes or discussions that may not suit the image the government wants to protect, particularly when you're looking at things like attacks on Gandhi. That's the second example I want to cite. This time I'm relying upon a website called southasiatoday.com. They cite two further examples of the way in which the Indian High Commission has allegedly interfered and restricted academic freedom. First, the Institute refused to publish a paper written by two fellows which were an attack on, or rather, let me put this like this, they were an attempt to understand attacks on Gandhi and the decapitation of his statue in Melbourne. Eventually, that paper had to be published by another university.
That's where I think
it wasn't published by another university.
It was published by the newspaper of the University of Melbourne,
but not by the institute.
I mean, because this is the story that I have read, and it says it was published in Pursuit, which is really a fact sheet or a research journal or research newspaper of the University of Melbourne.
But why did the institute not publish it?
Now, this is something which I want to get to the bottom of, but in any case, what you'll have to accept,
do you think the institute
that there is editorial
should have published it?
Depends on the quality of the work. I haven't seen the quality of the work. You have to cast an editorial judgment. You have to have it refereed to see whether it benchmarks against the standards that you set for yourself.
But again, this story came out in southasiantoday.com on the 1st of April. It's written by a former associate or fellow of the institute, Dilpreet Kaur. And as far as I know, this story hasn't been denied, and this is now 11 days old.
Again, I mean, this is again something which the institute should look at, but Dilpreet Kaur, from what I understand, is someone who was a staffer in the institute and had to leave for circumstances that I'm not aware of, but Dilpreet Kaur was actually someone who worked on the media cell of the Australia-India Institute.
an equally worrying instance that she refers to in that article in southasiantoday.com. She says that a podcast made by the same two fellows whose article we talked about earlier was not put on the website of the institute.
Apparently, that's on the website. That's what I asked Lisa Singh. It's on the website as of today.
So maybe it was put after the article appeared.
I mean,
and remember, the podcast was on caste and the cooperation in India and abroad. And again, caste issues, she alleges, Dilpreet Kaur alleges, are embarrassing for the Indian government.
No, it's on the website. And secondly, Karan, the website, look, I'm not going to be the spokesman for the institute because I'm just a member of their governing body. But the website has been transformed by the present CEO over the past 2-3 months. So it's really gone live on the 1st of April, I think.
Let me quote what Dilpreet Kaur writes in that article in southasiantoday.com. She's talking both about the article as well as about the podcast. Both the article and the podcast, sidelined by the Australia-India Institute, unpack an India that supporters of the Modi regime would find difficult to sit with. Matters of caste and Gandhi's racist ideologies do not complement an image that the BJP tries to maintain in the West. Now, many in India may find it objectionable to have the word racist associated with Gandhi's ideologies, but Alex von Tunzelmann in her book, which is internationally acclaimed, has proven, as have separately South African scholars writing from South Africa, that in his days in South Africa, Gandhi did call blacks Kafirs. He did want Asians treated almost like whites, not like blacks. And all of that today does sound racist. And certainly in Ghana, his statue was removed for this reason. So if for those reasons these podcasts or these articles are not being published, then clearly there is a political intervention that's undesirable.
No, Karan, you'll have to understand that a university works on the basis of what is described as a triple helix model. One is the business of teaching and learning, which is transfer of knowledge. Second is fundamental research. And third is leadership, extension, engagement with the wider community. Now, different departments of the university and different individuals may have their roles 70% teaching and only 20% research and only 10% engagement. As far as the Australia-India Institute goes, it can't be in the business of only knowledge, fundamental knowledge creation. They can't be biochemists.
No.
They have to be physicians.
Absolutely.
More importantly,
it can't be only in the business. However, what these people are alleging is that it is not permitting views to be aired that are unfavorable, let's take Gandhi as an example, to his image. Now, it's a proven fact that we can't deny that he had an attitude to blacks that we would today consider reprehensible. He changed, by the way, and it's laudable that he became a very different person after he left South Africa in terms of his attitude to color. But in South Africa, that was the case. It's not beyond dispute. So if some fellow at the institute refers to this and writes about it, should it be censored?
But not at all. It shouldn't be censored. But as a director or a CEO, you have the responsibility to decide the priorities of the institute. The present director, in my time, there was a different set of priorities. We had to build an understanding across the spectrum in different sectors, has decided that strategy and geostrategy, economics and trade, and public diplomacy are going to be her 3 areas of focus.
And so anything else, particularly if it embarrasses India, will not be permitted?
No. That there will be a selection in terms of importance, there will be a selection in terms of the hierarchy, and there will be a selection in terms of the resources that you can devote to it. You can't decide that you will be the one shop for India in Australia.
Absolutely. But you know what the allegation that these 13 fellows who've resigned are making? And it's again there in the letter they wrote to Duncan Maskell, the Vice-Chancellor of Melbourne University, that the institute, and undoubtedly this happened after you left, but the institute has now got caught up and mixed up in attempts being made either by the Indian High Commission or the Australian government to improve the political and economic standing and image of India. And as a result, academic work that conflicts with that attempt to improve the image is being suppressed, or it's being ignored, or it's being sidelined, or it's not being promoted and encouraged. What they want, and this is in their letter, is that there should be a greater distance between the High Commission and the Institute, and they say we do not see the Australia-India Institute's approach reflecting this. They want a greater distance rather than a closer contact.
Karan, there are three issues that you raise. On one, there's complete and fundamental agreement between you and me,
Which is
that no High Commission, no embassy should interfere in academic, scholarly work. It's beyond their remit.
But the
It's
thing is, you don't believe, but you also don't believe they are interfering.
As I said, on the basis of the experience that I've had, no High Commission or ambassador had the audacity, let me put it.
But that was much earlier. Is it possible that today, after you left,
and Senator Lisa Singh testified to the fact that she hasn't, and this is of course.
But would she actually admit that they
She's a
have
close enough friend of mine to tell me, it's nudge, nudge, wink, wink. It's not easy dealing with this government. Remember, she's a Labour senator. She's someone who's seen public life. So she's someone who opposes the Adani groups.
You're pretty certain that this sort of interference that's being alleged
I think the only person
who
probably could have happened is the one director between me and Lisa Singh, who was an Oxbridge, died in the wool academic, but unfortunately, while they're scholarly, they often lack spine. If it had happened, it happened then. But otherwise, let me give you an example.
So there is a real possibility that there was a period when, in fact, interference was happening.
Because I don't know enough, and because you state facts, and because I don't want to challenge the facts published in the Age or cast disrepute on these all these fellows. So I suggest that if it happened, it was a dreadful mistake. If you have to learn anything from the Chinese example, is how badly they did these things. They set up Confucius institutes, they funded them, and then they hoped that the rest of the West would fall a prey to the propaganda of these Confucius institutes. They were all closed down.
But the reason why what's happening in South Australia is so believable is because this sort of thing has been happening elsewhere as well. Now, Audrey Trushka, who's perhaps one of the world's most renowned scholars of Mughal India, is constantly being harassed by Hindutva trolls. She's tweeted about it, she's written about it. If it's happening to her in Canada, it could be happening in Australia. It's a pattern that worries people because it's all designed around an attempt to project and protect a particularly Hindutva image of India, and anything that clashes or detracts from it is not liked.
I don't think so. I think in America you have a critical mass of Hindutva-inspired thinkers and people opposing them.
Not in Australia.
In Australia, scholarship on India really was a repository of what used to be called the subaltern school. Ranajit Koha, Basham, even Dipesh Chakravarti, certainly Ranajit and Dipesh set up what became known as a subaltern school in the ANU and through much of Australia.
So you don't believe that the problem in America is a problem in Australia?
Many of these scholars, and not in any way challenging their formidable academic reputation, are anti-status, anti-establishment, as they should be, as good academics can often be. But for them to decide the future of the Australia-India Institute or suggest that it's really become a victim to the Indian High Commissioner's design is a bit rich.
You don't think there's a danger that as these stories spread through the Australian media, and the Age is a very respected paper, India will begin to get a bad name in academic circles?
I think the Indian High Commission, certainly Manpreet Vora, should completely deny these allegations, because having known Manpreet Vora, I would be surprised that someone who's so urbane and
why hasn't he?
I'm surprised. I assume that he
could
has.
Could it be because he can't deny them?
No, as I said, if Lisa Singh says it, I think categorically that there's not one instance that she can remember where any pressure was put on her, and there's no one instance that I can remember that either the consulate in Melbourne or in Canberra. Remember also, Australia is, despite the subaltern school, Australia has had a schizophrenic relationship with India and Indian scholarship, which goes back to the second Prime Minister of Australia, Alfred Deakin, and goes back to the fact that Melbourne University almost closed down its India's department, and it was only now revived the scholarship, which can.
So they would be very sensitive and very aware of not letting this happen.
Yeah, and they at one stage donated all their books to La Trobe University, so they're very conscious that India matters, and India matters in a way that the diversity of India matters and the diversity of scholarship of India matters.
Let me end by putting this to you. As the founding director and CEO of a very prestigious institute, for which I'm sure you must have a huge emotional attachment, would you consider having a quiet word either with the Foreign Minister or with Manpreet, the High Commissioner, Manpreet Vora, to say, this is becoming a matter of concern. We ought not to have these articles in Australian papers. We ought not to be reading about them in India. If it's not true, issue a statement. But more importantly, go meet the institute, meet the fellows and sit with them and assure them that they've misunderstood. Because personal communication can make a huge difference. And clearly, this is a matter of perception and trust. And if the perception and trust is going against us, then don't you think, as a former director, you could have a word, either with Mr. Jaishankar or with Manpreet Vora, and say, sort it out personally, it's not good, this should continue.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the fact that you're holding a program on this and you've invited me to speak on this suggests that there is a deal of salience that it's already receiving. So I will speak to High Commissioner Vora, and if I get the time and the opportunity, certainly speak to the External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, who, however, also visited the institute, as did Minister Piyush Goyal. So many of these problems which these academic fellows could have, they could have easily voiced them in those forums where these ministers were present.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Mattoo.
Thank you, Karan, for having me.